Today, let us study the words of God with the title, When Israel Was Strong and When Israel Was Weak. By examining the history of Israel, let us learn when Israel became a strong nation and why it was invaded by other countries when it became weak. Through this past history, let us learn the lesson God is giving us today. Let's take a look at Romans chapter 15, verse 4. For everything that was written in the past was written to do what? To teach us, who are living in these days. God showed us His will through the past history. It says, for everything that was written in the past was written to teach us. Then, by looking into the past history, we can learn when Israel became weak and when it became a strong nation. Let us take a look at Judges chapter 3 together. Chapter 3, verse 7 reads, The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs. Let us continue to see the result that was brought about due to this situation. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, so that He sold them into the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram Naharaim, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. Here, we can learn a very important lesson. Whenever the Israelites forsook God, disobeying God's regulations, commands, and laws, they became weak. They were trampled on and plundered by other nations. This is a very important point. In our life of faith too, under which situations will our Zion become strong? And in which situations will it become weak? Everyone, please pay attention to this point. The Israelites were subject for 8 years. Verse 9. But when they cried out to the Lord, they cried out because they were in agony, living miserable lives. Don't you agree? When they cried out to God and pleaded with Him, He raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. Peace was restored in the land of Israel. So the land had peace for 40 years, until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. For 40 years, they served God diligently. They gave glory and thanks to God for His grace, and enjoyed peace for 40 years. The reason Israel could enjoy peace is because they became a strong nation. A nation is able to enjoy peace when it becomes strong. In those times, weak nations were always trampled on by stronger ones. Thus, the Israelites followed God's will for 40 years, and as a result, they could enjoy a time of peace for 40 years. Now, let's take a look at verse 12. Once again, the Israelites did, what did they do? Evil acts always cause great problems. As they forsook God's teachings and disobeyed God's commandments, they grew further and further away from God. God was grieved whenever the Israelites were deceived and fell into the temptation of following evil pagan customs. Let's look at verse 12 again. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. Getting the Ammonites and the Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel. And they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. The mighty nation of Israel became weak and subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. In Judges, 1 Chronicles, and 1 Kings, throughout the history of Israel, we can see that Israel was either a strong nation or a weak and powerless nation. There was no in between. In what circumstances were they strong? And when were they weak? They became weak when they deserted God's regulations, commands, and laws. They were plundered and enslaved by neighboring countries. This history was repeated over and over again. Why is God showing us, who live in these days, the history of Israel? It is written in Romans chapter 15, verse 4, "For everything that was written in the past was written for what purpose? To teach us." Then, what lessons should we learn from God through the history of the Israelites recorded in the book of Judges? Whenever Israel obeyed God's commands, regulations, and laws, they were a strong and stable nation. Isn't this what God desires for us as well? Let's see verse 12 once again. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. Getting the Ammonites and Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. When it says the Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, it means that they were conquered by Moab and became their slaves. In other words, they lost the battle. Verse 15. Again the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera the Benjamite. The Israelites sent him with the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword, about 1.5 feet long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. He presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way the men who had carried it. At the idols near Gilgal, he himself turned back and said, "I have a secret message for you, O king." The king said, "Quiet," and all his attendants left him. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his summer palace and said, "I have a message from God for you." As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade, which came out his back. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind and locked them. As we can see, later on the Israelites were emancipated from Moab. Let's go to verse 30. That day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. The history of Israel repeats again and again, leaving God, then returning to God. We can see that whenever they abandoned God, they were invaded by other nations. Whenever they came to revere God, it was then that they became strong, enjoyed peace, and also received tribute from neighboring countries. Let's look at chapter 6, verse 1. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Here, we can see history repeat itself. Israel continued committing evil acts, then returned to God after repenting. Whenever they returned to God, they would become a strong nation and receive tribute from surrounding countries, owing to God's favor. However, later on, the Israelites would lose a battle and then had to pay tribute to other countries. They went through the cycle of becoming weak and then strong. In the Bible, we can easily pinpoint the moment when Israel was strong and when it was weak. Here, it says that the Lord gave them into the hands of the Midianites for 7 years. Verse 2. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped out on the land and ruined the crops, all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count the men and their camels. They invaded the land to ravish it. Whenever the Israelites did evil in the eyes of God, we can see these kinds of events occurring again and again. Verse 6. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. Here we can see in verse 25, when they cried out to God for help, He sent Gideon. Gideon was sent to save the Israelites out of the hands of the Midianites. This is how Israel became strong once again. Let's go to verse 25. That same night, the Lord said to him, "Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old." Then what should he do? Tear down your father's altar to Baal, and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on the top of this height, using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the men of the town, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. Gideon destroyed all the idols, and the 300 warriors defeated 135,000 Midianite soldiers by the grace of God. This can be seen in chapter 8. Let's go to Judges chapter 8, verse 10. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, with a force of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the eastern peoples. 120,000 swordmen had fallen. At this point, the victory was already determined. Gideon's 300 warriors destroyed 120,000 Midianite men. Among 135,000 soldiers, only 15,000 escaped, but they too were later destroyed. Eventually, the Israelites were freed and enjoyed peace for 40 years once again. Let's see chapter 8, verse 28. Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land enjoyed, what did it enjoy? Peace, 40 years. Here, enjoy peace means that Israel became a strong nation again. And as a result, even the surrounding nations would not think about attacking them. Following this great victory, many people petitioned Gideon, "We wish for you and your family to rule over us for generations to come." Gideon answered the people of Israel, "Neither I nor my son will rule over you. God is the only one who will rule over you. Fear God and submit to Him." Gideon said this in verse 22. Because of this, there was great peace throughout Israel. Verse 22. The Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us." you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us out of the hand of Midian. But Gideon told them, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. Only who will rule? Only the Lord will rule over you. What happened when Israel obeyed? Do not the words, the land enjoyed peace 40 years, mean that Israel became a strong nation again? Through the history of the Israelites, recorded in the book of Judges, we can learn about what made Israel strong and what made it weak. When Israel followed God's commands, teachings, and guidance, they became such a powerful nation that other countries dared not oppose them. However, when they committed evil acts, which were forbidden by God's laws and commands, their strength immediately deteriorated. Now, let us look at the time before the Judges by looking into the history of Joshua. As we have seen, throughout all ages and history, the nation of Israel became weak whenever they came to sin against God. Let's confirm this in Joshua chapter 7. Joshua chapter 7, verse 1. But the Israelites acted unfaithfully in regard to the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Prior to Achan's sin, the Israelite army was powerful enough to conquer even a strong city like Jericho. However, after Achan sinned, what change took place with Israel's army? Let's see in detail in verse 2. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth-aven to the east of Bethel, and told them, Go up and spy out the region. So the men went up and spied out Ai. This is the city of Ai. After spying on the city of Ai, when they returned to Joshua, they said, Not all the people will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it. And do not weary all the people, for only a few men are there. So about 3,000 men went up. But they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted and became like water. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, Ah, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. O Lord, what can I say, now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name? The Lord said to Joshua, Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. Joshua was surprised at how weak the once mighty Israelite army became. Previously, God had greatly strengthened Israel, that they were able to win a victory over the formidable city of Jericho. Now, however, they became so helpless, trembling with fear, that they were not even able to defeat the small city of Ai. What was the reason? They committed wickedness against God. Regardless of whether their wickedness was hidden or in plain sight, so long as wickedness existed, Israel could not help but become a weak and powerless nation. On the other hand, although their enemies seemed so formidable that they themselves looked like grasshoppers in their own eyes, what would happen when they obeyed all God's laws, regulations, and commandments? Didn't God help them and give them great strength to destroy all their enemies? Therefore, we must learn an important lesson through the history of what made Israel weak or strong. Today, let us ask ourselves, how should I live my life for the gospel to be preached from Samaria and to the ends of the earth? Everyone, isn't the answer obvious? We must always be on God's side, doing all things together with God in every aspect of the gospel work. When we faithfully keep all God's regulations, commands, and laws, will not the gospel work be completed? Let us learn the same lesson through a teaching in Acts chapter 5. Acts chapter 5, verse 38. Therefore, in the present case I advise you, leave these men alone. Let them go. For if their purpose or activity is of human origin, what will happen? Because it is weak, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will not be able to. What can they not do? No matter how many people come, with whatever authority they come with, they will never stop these men. You will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourselves fighting against God. Everything must come from God, whether it is the method of preaching or the regulations of the truth. The gospel work cannot help but fail if any aspect of the gospel work originates from personal opinions, philosophy books, or teachings from the world instead of from God. Doesn't life, death, curse, blessing, and strength originate from God? If we live according to God's words, preach according to God's teachings, and live a life of faith according to God's will, then our enemies will remain far from us, the children of God. Please, pay close attention to when the Israelites were a strong and powerful nation in history. And also pay close attention to when they became weak. Their strength was not contingent on their number, whether many or few. Didn't God grant them strength to overcome 135,000 with only 300 men? However, God showed that even a vast army was weak, being chased off by an army of a very small city when they did not keep God's commands. The history of Israel, recorded by God, serves as a lesson for us today. Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, knowing this said, "Pay attention to whether their teachings and actions come from God or from men." Did the Sabbath day originate from men? Did the Passover originate from men? All the teachings that the saints of the early church followed originated directly from Christ. Given this, how could such a strong people ever be stopped? Some people might have physically hindered them, but their spirit could never be broken. That is why the gospel of Jesus Christ was instantly preached to all the regions of Israel and spread even to the neighboring countries, such as Italy, Greece, and all throughout Europe. If these teachings and activities come from human origin, it will fail in the end. However, if it is from God, it will never fail. God is clearly awakening us through these words. Let us see one more verse in 2 Kings chapter 17. By carefully examining the history of the Israelites, who became weak when they did evil, We must learn to obey God's commands, regulations, and laws that He has entrusted to us. Let's turn to chapter 17, verse 37. God gave us the words, "You must always be careful to keep the decrees and ordinances, the laws and commands He wrote for you. Do not worship other gods. Do not forget the covenant I have made with you. And do not worship other gods. Rather, worship the Lord your God. It is He who will deliver you from the hand of all your enemies." Israel did not become strong because they were innately strong. Rather, it was because God was with His people, who kept His commands, regulations, and laws, and led them to the path of victory by granting them much wisdom and strength. Ultimately, victory depended on whether God was with them or not. When God was with them, they became strong. When God left them, because of their evil deeds, they became weak. Let us graciously and beautifully obey all the words of God, such as the New Covenant, and all the teachings God has commanded us, so that we may become strong through the invisible help of God's power, and preach the gospel from Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Let us suppose a soul is at a crossroads between Satan and us, and we are both fighting for his life. Can't we lead him to salvation and be victorious when we are strong? By ourselves, we cannot be victorious in the fight against Satan. Who can give us strength and lead us to victory? It is only possible when we are clothed with the power of God. For God to be pleased with us and help us, we must forever obey the words, be careful to keep all the decrees, commands, and laws given by God, as recorded in the Bible. When we do so, God will grant us great strength and lead us to victory. Today, through the history of the forefathers of faith, we have all come to realize the situations in which Israel became strong and when they became weak. I hope that all people of Zion will live according to the teachings of God. By this, I would like to conclude today's sermon. Thank you very much.